Isabella, a young woman of unmatched beauty and kindness, had once lived a life filled with warmth and happiness before her mother's untimely death. Now her days were marked by sorrow and obedience under the strict and bitter rule of her stepmother, Lady Evelyn. The once lively home was now cold, the halls echoing with the quietness of suppressed joy. Lady Evelyn, driven by jealousy and greed, saw Isabella as nothing more than a nuisance, a rival for attention, and a constant reminder of the life she could never attain, despite all her wealth and status. Lady Evelyn had always been envious of Isabella's natural grace and beauty, but as the years passed, her envy morphed into something more sinister. No matter how hard she tried, Lady Evelyn could never garner the admiration Isabella received so effortlessly. Everywhere they went, people whispered of Isabella's beauty and kind heart, a fact that gnawed at Lady Evelyn's pride. In her twisted mind, she became obsessed with the idea of ruining Isabella's life, believing that this would elevate her own stature. One cold afternoon, after hearing praise for Isabella at yet another social gathering, Lady Evelyn concocted a cruel plan, one that would humiliate Isabella and strip her of her dignity. She would arrange a marriage between Isabella and the town beggar, Liam. Lady Evelyn's lips curled into a malicious smile at the thought of Isabella, a vision of grace, being forced to wed a man who roamed the streets in tattered clothing, living off the scraps of others. It was the ultimate degradation, and she couldn't wait to see Isabella's spirit break. The day Lady Evelyn announced the engagement was one that would forever be seared into Isabella's memory. The town gathered at the mansion, anticipating news of Isabella's future. Many believed that she would be betrothed to one of the wealthy young nobles who had long admired her. After all, it seemed only fitting for a girl of her beauty and virtue to be matched with someone of high status. However, when Lady Evelyn revealed that Isabella was to be engaged to Liam, the beggar, a collective gasp spread through the crowd. Whispers quickly followed, and the shock was palpable. No one could understand the decision. Why would the beautiful Isabella be forced to marry a man so beneath her station? Isabella stood silently, her heart sinking as her stepmother's cruel words echoed in her mind. She had always known Lady Evelyn harbored no love for her, but this act of malice cut deeper than anything before. Yet Isabella remained poised, her face calm, though her heart was breaking. She had learned long ago that showing her emotions only fueled her stepmother's cruelty. Despite the humiliation, Isabella quietly accepted her fate, knowing there was little she could do to oppose Lady Evelyn's wishes. In the days that followed, the town was abuzz with gossip. People speculated about the reasons behind the bizarre engagement. Some believed that Isabella must have done something to anger her stepmother, while others pitied her, knowing the difficult life she had endured under Lady Evelyn's rule. The town's elite, once eager to align themselves with Isabella, now distanced themselves from her, viewing her engagement as a mark of disgrace. Isabella, though heartbroken, did not allow the gossip to consume her. She had always been a woman of quiet strength, and she faced her predicament with dignity. Every morning, she would walk through the market square, head held high, as the townspeople whispered and stared. It wasn't that she wasn't afraid of the future, she was terrified. But she had always believed in kindness and patience, hoping that one day fate would deliver her from her stepmother's cruelty. Despite the public humiliation, there was something about Liam that intrigued Isabella. She had often seen him sitting quietly in the town square, his face worn from hardship, but his eyes held a sense of calmness that seemed out of place for a beggar. Though his clothes were ragged, he never begged for coins with desperation, and he always carried himself with a quiet dignity. It was this quiet composure that made Isabella wonder if there was more to Liam than the town believed. As the wedding day drew nearer, Lady Evelyn's excitement grew. She could barely contain her glee at the thought of Isabella's public disgrace. Every detail of the wedding was designed to shame Isabella further. Instead of the grand affair befitting someone of Isabella's stature, the wedding would be held in the town square, where everyone could witness her humiliation. Lady Evelyn spared no effort in making the event as public and degrading as possible. She even spread rumors among the town, painting a picture of Isabella as a woman who had no choice but to marry a beggar due to her own failures. Late at night, Isabella would overhear Lady Evelyn laughing with her friends, mocking her situation and discussing how the wedding would be the talk of the town for years to come. Though Isabella's heart ached with the cruelty of it all, she refused to let her stepmother break her spirit. In the privacy of her small bedroom, she would weep for the life she had once dreamed of. But in the daylight, she remained composed and graceful, determined not to give Lady Evelyn the satisfaction of seeing her pain. As the wedding day approached, Isabella continued to go about her duties in the house, keeping her emotions tightly in check. But every night, when the mansion was quiet, she would steal away to the garden and stare up at the stars, seeking comfort in their steady, unwavering light. She couldn't help but wonder about Liam. Why had he agreed to the engagement? Surely he must know this was nothing but a cruel ploy by Lady Evelyn. Yet whenever she saw him in the town, there was something about his demeanor that made her question her assumptions. There was a part of Isabella that wanted to believe that Liam wasn't like the other beggars. He had a mysterious air about him, something that set him apart. She had noticed the way he carried himself, the subtle grace in his movements, and the quiet confidence in his gaze. Perhaps deep down, Isabella hoped that there was more to Liam than the beggar's rags he wore. Perhaps there was still a chance that this marriage would not be the disaster everyone expected. And so, as the day of her wedding loomed closer, Isabella clung to the small hope that her fate wasn't as bleak as it seemed. She couldn't shake the feeling that Liam was hiding something, and though she didn't know what it was, she held on to the belief that there was more to his story than met the eye. Unbeknownst to her, Isabella was right. The day of Isabella's engagement to Liam arrived with a sense of foreboding in the air, thick as the storm clouds that gathered on the horizon. Lady Evelyn, determined to make the event as humiliating as possible, had spared no expense in crafting a spectacle that would forever etch Isabella's shame into the memories of everyone in attendance. The grand mansion, usually reserved for high society events, had been decked in gaudy displays, a mockery of the elegance Isabella deserved. Instead of the delicate flowers and refined decor that one might expect at a noblewoman's engagement, Lady Evelyn had ordered garish, over-the-top arrangements, vivid displays meant to contrast Isabella's once glorious reputation with the shame she now faced. The entire town had been invited, from the wealthiest elites to the common folk who would never have set foot in the mansion under ordinary circumstances. Everyone was eager to witness the spectacle, the tale of the beautiful noblewoman brought to disgrace by a marriage to a beggar. Gossip had spread like wildfire, fueled by Lady Evelyn's own careful manipulation of the story. Whispers of scandal filled the air as guests arrived, all eyes on Isabella, who would soon face the humiliation of being betrothed to a man who lived in rags. As the hour of the engagement drew near, Isabella stood in her room, gazing at herself in the mirror. She had been dressed in a gown that, though simple, still radiated a quiet beauty. Her stepmother had refused her the luxury of the fine silks and jewels that would normally accompany such an event. But even in her modest attire, Isabella's grace shone through. There was a sadness in her eyes, a quiet resignation to the fate that had been thrust upon her, but there was also a strength, a resolve to face the day with dignity. Downstairs, the mansion buzzed with anticipation. Lady Evelyn moved through the crowd like a queen holding court, her smile wide and sharp as she greeted the guests. She could barely contain her delight, knowing that soon, the moment she had longed for would unfold. Isabella would be humiliated, her beauty and grace overshadowed by the man she was to marry. Lady Evelyn had ensured that even the lowest of the town's citizens had been invited to witness the event, eager for their shock and disdain to complete Isabella's public disgrace. At last, the moment arrived. The doors to the grand hall were thrown open, and in stepped Liam. His entrance was met with gasps and murmurs from the crowd. Dressed in his usual tattered clothes, his boots caked with the dirt of the streets, he cut a stark contrast to the lavish surroundings of the mansion. His face was unshaven, his hair unruly, and his clothing bore the unmistakable signs of hardship. And yet, as he walked into the room, his posture was straight, his step sure. He moved with a quiet confidence that seemed out of place for a man of his status. Isabella's heart sank at the sight of him. She had seen Liam before, of course, in the streets, begging for scraps of food or coins. But seeing him now, in the grandeur of the mansion, the reality of her situation struck her with full force. This was to be her future, bound to a man who had nothing, who lived in poverty and squalor. The weight of her fate pressed heavily upon her, but still she stood tall, refusing to let the shame overwhelm her. Liam approached the center of the room, where Isabella stood waiting with her stepmother by her side. The crowd watched in hushed anticipation, their eyes flickering between Isabella and the beggar who was to be her husband. Lady Evelyn, standing to the side with a smug smile on her face, reveled in the moment. This was her victory. The beautiful, graceful Isabella, beloved by all, was now to be tied to a man so beneath her station that it was laughable. Lady Evelyn could hardly contain her glee as she glanced at her stepdaughter, waiting for the moment when Isabella's composure would finally crack. But Isabella did not falter. As Liam drew near, she turned to face him fully, her eyes meeting his for the first time. To her surprise, there was something in his gaze that caught her off guard. She had expected to see shame or embarrassment in his eyes, but instead she found a quiet dignity that unsettled her. Despite his ragged appearance, there was a calmness in Liam's face, a confidence that seemed to defy the role he was meant to play in this cruel charade. The room fell silent as Liam and Isabella stood before each other. The officiant, a local nobleman who had been roped into performing the engagement ceremony, cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice barely audible over the tension in the air. But Isabella barely heard him. Her focus was entirely on Liam, on the strange sense of calm that radiated from him. There was something more to him, something that went beyond his appearance, and it unsettled her. As the officiant droned on, Isabella felt a flicker of something unexpected: hope. Could it be that Liam was not the man everyone believed him to be? Could there be more to him than the rags he wore? The thought was absurd, of course. Liam was a beggar, a man who lived off the charity of others. But the quiet strength in his eyes made Isabella wonder if there was more to his story than met the eye. The ceremony continued, but Isabella's mind was elsewhere, caught between her duty to her stepmother and the growing curiosity she felt toward Liam. She could sense the crowd's eyes on her, waiting for her to falter, to break under the weight of the humiliation. But she refused to give them the satisfaction. She stood tall, her hands clasped in front of her, her heart racing as the engagement drew to its conclusion. Finally, it was done. Isabella was now formally engaged to Liam, the beggar. The crowd erupted into whispered conversations, their shock and curiosity evident in their expressions. Lady Evelyn, unable to contain her glee, clapped her hands together in triumph, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. For her, the day had been a resounding success. But as Isabella looked at Liam, she felt a strange sense of unease. There was more to this man than met the eye, she was sure of it. And though her future seemed bleak, a small part of her clung to the hope that perhaps, just perhaps, Liam's quiet dignity would reveal a secret that would change everything. Lady Evelyn, however, was oblivious to Isabella's thoughts. To her, the day had gone perfectly, and she was certain that the marriage would be the ultimate humiliation for her stepdaughter. Little did she know that her cruel plot was about to unravel in ways she could never have imagined. The day of the wedding dawned with an ominous stillness, as though even the heavens held their breath in anticipation of the coming events. Isabella woke early, her heart weighed down by a sense of dread. Today was the day she would marry a beggar, not out of love or choice, but because of her stepmother's cruelty. The entire town was buzzing with anticipation, the scandal of her marriage to Liam, a man of the streets, having spread like wildfire. It was to be the most talked about event of the year, not because of its grandeur, but because of the humiliation that was expected to befall Isabella. The wedding was to be held in the grandest cathedral in the town, a place where the noble and elite gathered for events of great importance. Normally, such a venue would have hosted the weddings of dukes and duchesses, or wealthy merchants' daughters. But today it was filled with people eager to witness the disgrace of the once revered Isabella. Lady Evelyn had ensured that the wedding would be a spectacle, inviting every notable figure in town, from wealthy merchants to local lords, all eager to see the daughter of a nobleman wed to a beggar. She spared no effort in turning this event into a display of her power over Isabella, but beneath her malicious smile lay the thrill of victory. In her mind, today would be the final act in her plot to ruin her stepdaughter's life forever. As Isabella was dressed in her wedding gown, she felt the weight of her fate settling upon her like a cloak. The gown was simple, far from the luxurious fabric and intricate lace that she might have worn had her father still been alive to oversee her marriage. Her stepmother had denied her any extravagance, but despite the plainness of her dress, Isabella's beauty was undeniable. Her hair was arranged in loose curls that framed her face. Her eyes darkened with the sadness she had tried to conceal for so long. She was the picture of grace, even as her heart was breaking. She looked at her reflection, feeling as though she were gazing at a stranger. Who was this woman about to walk down the aisle and marry a beggar? The humiliation felt overwhelming, but deep inside she resolved to hold her head high. She would not give Lady Evelyn the satisfaction of seeing her defeated. As much as her stepmother had plotted her downfall, Isabella would not crumble. She would face this day with as much dignity as she could muster, even if it meant walking into a future she had never imagined for herself. The hours passed quickly, and before she knew it, Isabella was standing at the entrance of the cathedral. The grand doors loomed ahead, and inside she could hear the murmur of voices, the rustle of gowns, and the shuffle of feet as the congregation waited for her appearance. With every step closer to the door, her heart pounded louder, each beat a reminder of the weight of the moment. She was about to marry a beggar in front of all the people who had once respected her, and there was no escaping it. The doors opened, and a hush fell over the crowd as Isabella stepped into view. The entire cathedral seemed to collectively hold its breath as she began her slow walk down the aisle. Her footsteps echoed in the grand space, each one a reminder of her impending fate. As she moved forward, she could feel the eyes of the crowd upon her, some filled with pity, others with curiosity, and many with amusement at the spectacle that Lady Evelyn had orchestrated. Lady Evelyn, seated in the front row with a smug expression, could barely contain her satisfaction. To her, this was the culmination of her plan, the moment she had longed for since she had taken control of the household. Isabella, the stepdaughter who had always been more beautiful, more graceful, and more loved by the people, was about to be humbled in the most public and degrading way. The sight of Isabella in a simple gown, walking toward a man dressed in rags, was everything she had hoped for. At the altar stood Liam, dressed once again in his tattered clothes. His hair was still unkempt, his face unshaven, and his hands bore the calluses of a man who had lived a hard life. He looked every bit the beggar he was meant to be, yet there was something about the way he stood, the quiet strength in his posture, that seemed out of place. Isabella noticed it too. For days now, she had sensed that there was more to Liam than met the eye. As she walked closer to him, her heart began to pound not just with dread, but with curiosity. Liam's eyes met hers as she approached the altar. There was a calmness in his gaze that unnerved her. Most men would be ashamed to be in his position, standing before a crowd of nobles in rags, but not Liam. He seemed almost serene. Isabella couldn't understand it. This was supposed to be a moment of humiliation for both of them, yet he stood there as though he were completely unaffected by the whispers and judgment of the crowd. The officiant began the ceremony, his voice echoing in the vast space of the cathedral. Isabella barely heard the words. Her mind was racing with questions, with doubts, with the weight of what was about to happen. As the vows approached, she felt her hands grow cold and clammy. She glanced at Lady Evelyn, who sat with a twisted smile on her face, clearly reveling in the moment. Just as the officiant was about to ask for their vows, Liam raised his hand, stopping the ceremony. The crowd gasped in surprise, whispers spreading through the cathedral like wildfire. Lady Evelyn's smile faltered for the first time as she watched Liam step forward. "I have something to reveal," Liam said, his voice steady and strong. The crowd fell silent, every eye on him. Isabella turned to look at him, her heart pounding in her chest. What could he possibly have to reveal? "For many years, I have lived among the people, disguised as a beggar, watching and observing the hearts of those around me," Liam continued, his voice clear and confident. "But I am not what you think I am." A murmur spread through the crowd. Lady Evelyn's face twisted in confusion and anger. What was happening? This was not part of her plan. Liam's gaze swept over the crowd, and then he looked at Isabella. "I am not a beggar. I am, in fact, Prince Liam, heir to the throne of a distant kingdom." The cathedral erupted in gasps and shocked whispers. Isabella stood frozen, her heart racing. "Prince? Her mind struggled to comprehend what she had just heard. Liam continued, his eyes never leaving Isabella. I disguised myself as a beggar to see who would treat me with kindness and who would judge me by my appearance. Isabella, he said, turning to face her fully, you are the only one who has looked beyond what you saw on the surface. Even when faced with this cruel situation, you have treated me with dignity. It is because of you that I now reveal my true identity. Isabella's heart swelled with a mix of emotions, shock, disbelief, and a growing sense of awe. She had sensed there was more to Liam, but never in her wildest dreams had she imagined this. Lady Evelyn, meanwhile, sat paralyzed in her seat, her face drained of all color. Her plan had unraveled in the most spectacular way. Instead of humiliating Isabella, she had unwittingly set her up to marry a prince. Liam reached out and took Isabella's hand, his touch gentle but firm. I have chosen you, Isabella, not because of your beauty or your status, but because of your heart. You are the one I want by my side. The crowd, still in shock, erupted in applause and cheers. Isabella, overwhelmed by the turn of events, could only nod, tears filling her eyes as the reality of the situation settled in. What had begun as a day of humiliation had turned into the most extraordinary moment of her life. Lady Evelyn, her face twisted in defeat, could do nothing but watch as the crowd celebrated Isabella's newfound fortune. Her cruel plot had failed spectacularly, and now she was the one left in disgrace. As the ceremony resumed, it was no longer a marriage between a beggar and a noblewoman, but a union between a prince and the woman who had unknowingly captured his heart. The revelation of Liam's true identity hung in the air like an electric charge, leaving the entire cathedral in stunned silence. For what felt like an eternity, no one moved or spoke, as though they were frozen in disbelief. The beggar, no, the prince, stood tall and composed, his once tattered clothing now a mere disguise that had unraveled with his words. His princely bearing was undeniable, and as the guests blinked away their shock, whispers began to ripple through the room. How could this be? A prince? Here? Among us? Lady Evelyn sat stiffly in her chair, her eyes wide with disbelief, her mouth agape. Her carefully constructed plot to humiliate Isabella had crumbled before her eyes, and she was left scrambling internally, trying to grasp what had just happened. This was not the ending she had planned for. She had expected to see Isabella crushed, humiliated beyond repair, married to a man beneath her station, mocked by all who witnessed the event. But instead, her stepdaughter now stood before a prince, chosen for her heart, her humility, and her grace. The Prince Liam, still holding Isabella's hand, turned to face the crowd. His voice was steady as he began to address the stunned gathering. For years, I traveled in disguise, Liam explained, his voice cutting through the murmurs. I sought not wealth, power, or status, but the true nature of those I encountered. I wished to find someone who would treat me with dignity and kindness, regardless of my outward appearance. His eyes flicked to Lady Evelyn briefly, a subtle accusation hanging in the air. Many turned me away. Many judged me, scorned me, without knowing who I truly was. But Isabella, he looked back at her, his voice softening, showed me something different. Even when faced with her own hardship, she treated me with respect, something that no wealth or title could ever replace. Isabella felt her heart race, her thoughts swirling as she tried to process what was happening. This man, this beggar who she had been forced to marry, was now revealed to be a prince. Her entire world had shifted in a matter of moments, and she wasn't sure whether to feel relief, joy, or sheer disbelief. But as she looked into Liam's eyes, she saw nothing but sincerity. It was as though he had been waiting for her to truly see him, just as she had done during their brief but profound interactions. Around them, the crowd had begun to shift uneasily, murmurs of surprise and excitement building as the full weight of Liam's words settled in. Lady Evelyn, however, sat motionless, her face growing pale as realization hit her like a wave. The guests who had once flocked to her, eager to revel in Isabella's downfall, now turned their eyes toward her with expressions of disdain and shock. One of the lords, a man of considerable influence in the town, finally broke the tension. He stood from his seat, his voice loud and clear. Prince Liam, he addressed the man with newfound respect. Your wisdom in testing the hearts of those around you is commendable. Isabella has proven herself worthy of your affection, not because of her title or her beauty, but because of her goodness. It is she who should be honored, and we stand in awe of her strength in the face of such cruelty. The words sent a ripple through the crowd. Many of the guests began to nod in agreement, and a few of them shot disdainful glances toward Lady Evelyn. Isabella could feel the shift in the room as sympathy for her began to grow, and the cruelty of Lady Evelyn's actions became clear to everyone present. Isabella, who had always carried herself with grace, even in the face of adversity, now stood vindicated in the eyes of the entire town. Lady Evelyn, sensing her influence slipping away, stood abruptly from her chair. Her face twisted in desperation as she tried to salvage what was left of her reputation. This cannot be," she stammered, her voice shrill. "I was only trying to do what was best for Isabella. She was too proud, too arrogant. She needed to be taught a lesson." The crowd turned against her in an instant. Her excuses were met with cold stares and murmurs of disapproval. "A lesson?" one woman muttered. "She only wanted to humiliate her. Look at her now, caught in her own wicked schemes." Lady Evelyn's eyes darted around the room, searching for support, but found none. The very people she had hoped would laugh at Isabella's disgrace were now turning their backs on her. Desperation seeped into her features, and she tried again to speak, but this time her voice faltered. She began, but no one was listening anymore. Her influence had crumbled in the span of a few moments, and there was nothing left for her to cling to. Isabella, ever kind, glanced at her stepmother with a mixture of pity and sadness. Lady Evelyn had tried to break her, had plotted her ruin with such malice, but now she was the one standing in the ruins of her own creation. Isabella could see that in her stepmother's desperation, there was no joy to be had, only the bitter consequences of her cruelty. Liam, sensing the tension in the room, turned to Isabella and spoke gently. "There is no need for more pain today," he said. "Let us end this chapter with grace and dignity, just as you have shown throughout." He looked back at the crowd. "There will be no further retribution. The truth has been revealed, and that is enough." Lady Evelyn, though disgraced, was spared the public humiliation of further punishment, but her reputation was in tatters. The once proud woman slinked away from the cathedral, her head bowed in shame, while the rest of the town watched her departure in silence. It was clear to all that her downfall had been of her own making. As the crowd began to disperse, still buzzing with the revelations of the day, Liam turned to Isabella. "I had hoped to find someone who could see past the exterior, who would value what was in my heart rather than my title or wealth. You have shown me that you are that person, Isabella." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes as she looked at him, overwhelmed by the kindness and understanding in his gaze. "I never imagined this," she whispered. "I thought I was doomed to a life of humiliation." Liam smiled softly, lifting her hand to his lips. "You were never doomed, Isabella. You have a strength within you that no one could take away. And now, if you will have me, we can begin a life together, one built on trust, kindness, and love." The simplicity and sincerity of his proposal took Isabella's breath away. There was no grand display of power, no flaunting of his royal status. Liam had revealed himself to her, not as a prince, but as a man who had chosen her for who she was at her core. With tears in her eyes, Isabella nodded, her heart full. "Yes," she said softly, "I will." In the days that followed, Liam and Isabella were married in a small, intimate ceremony, far removed from the spectacle that Lady Evelyn had originally planned. There were no grand displays of wealth or power, just the quiet, sincere union of two people who had found something real in each other. Lady Evelyn, her reputation ruined, was left to face the consequences of her actions, shunned by the very society she had once controlled. Isabella, on the other hand, found the happiness she had long been denied. With Liam by her side, she had finally found the love and respect she deserved, proving that true beauty lay not in appearances or wealth, but in the kindness of the heart. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you thought about the story and share any themes or ideas you'd like to hear in future stories. Your feedback means the world to me. Thanks for watching.